10 tips that got me from here to there in less than a year. First, I studied the masters. Not just their art, but how did they get there? Tip number 1 then is to learn from the mistakes and successes of others who are ahead in their art journey. And the pros kind of all say the same thing, which is to prioritize the art fundamentals. They say to invest majority of effort on practicing the basics before technique. As soon as I stopped obsessing about style and shifted my energy to improving the fundamentals, my drawing skills progressed and a style emerged on its own. Pro tip number 2 is to prioritize the fundamentals. Tip number 3, have a learning plan for your drawing practice. When I started taking pen and ink more seriously, I knew I should take lessons. At first, I took tutorials that seemed most exciting to me. Fun, though progress was sporadic. But when I modified the approach to my learning objective, things began to change. Since prioritizing the fundamentals is critical, then logically, the next step was to determine which of those are most relevant to pen and ink drawing, because that's what I wanted to get better at. And from there, I looked for learning resources that specifically address that need. For example, let's assess my first raven drawing. Without even needing to compare it to a master's work, you can see that shape and form of the bird are a bit primitive and flat. So with this information, I looked for lessons about shape and form, and that provided a plan for my drawing practice. This plan had 3 steps. Step 1, learn more about shape and form through tutorials and resources. 2, practice those newly learned fundamentals with targeted exercises to grow the skill. Then apply the skill into my pen and ink project, which was to improve that raven. Over time, I was ready for the next fundamental. Tip number 4, have a means to self-assess. If you're going to have a plan for learning, you also need a reliable way to track your progress. What worked for me was to, first, I date my sketchbooks, practice doodles and final drawings, so there's a time frame of when I drew what. Second, I pick 1 or 2 consistent subjects. Right now, I want to improve how I render clouds, and so I repeat clouds as to compare apples to apples, so to speak. Also, I often time my drawings because it's not valid to compare a 15-minute sketch to a 15-hour drawing. Tip number 5 is to choose exercises that promote the results you want. The result I most wanted was to improve my pen and ink bird drawings. Therefore, with the end result in mind is how I chose what exercises to practice. For example, if you wanted to get better at drawing buildings, then probably perspective is a fundamental to focus on, and a related exercise would likely include horizon lines and vanishing points. For drawing characters, then anatomy, proportions, and perhaps referencing the Loomis or Bridgman method would be appropriate exercises to improve characters. Tip number 6, do warm-ups. Before any sessions, whether it be a practice exercise or a final drawing project, I aim to always start with a warm-up. It begins with an actual physical warm-up of fingers and wrists and such. Then I draw up to 50 spheres, circles, lines, or instead I'll do some quick sketches in timed intervals. I use a digital clock and I go 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, 10 minutes, etc. And that brings me to tip number 7, which is how to best hold your tools and set up the drawing environment. This avoids repetitive use injuries and also supports effective drawing skills. As a beginner, I was fond of what is called the tripod grip, but it creates tension in the hand, and over time, this grip also proved to be an impractical way to draw. After observing the pros in action, such as Master Kim Jung-gi, I gradually was able to switch to the loose hold about halfway up the pen and soon realized how much easier it was to move the whole arm rather than being restricted to my wrists and fingers. Now there are circumstances such as for drawing the small details where the tripod hold is appropriate. The angle of the drawing board is also a factor. For instance, for a pencil sketch or when inking using technical pens, I place my easel in a mostly upright position as to not get any distortion in my drawing. However, when the pencil sketch is done and if I'm inking with a dip pen or doing brushwork, because the ink tends to run down the page with the pull of gravity, I place the easel at a low angle or flat. I'm mindful of ergonomics and avoid slanting my neck or back, aiming for an upright position. Of course, there's nothing wrong with the comfort pose once in a while. Tip number 8, establish a workflow. Essentially, a workflow is a sequential process or an effective routine. It keeps me organized so that I can focus more on my art and less on disruptive tasks. Here are 4 4 great resources. How an Artist Avoids Procrastination by Dan Birdshaw. How I Schedule My Week as a Small Creative Business by Mimi Moo Illustration. The Power of Habit is a life-altering book. If you've not read it, here is an animated summary by Wisdom for Life. And Notion is a productivity app. It's really blown up in popularity, and I've come to rely on it. Here, Ali Abdal talks about how he uses Notion in his creative workflow. Once you have a workflow, it gets easier for the very important tip number 9, which is consistency. I committed to drawing 5 to 6 days a week, and I've been able to stick to it for over 2 years now. There are days when I only have 15 minutes, though I do make the most of it by having lists prepared so that I never run out of ideas of what to draw. I maintain a list of different exercises that I keep adding to as I come across new ones, and a list of prompts. And speaking of prompts, tip number 10 is to participate in monthly art challenges. Art challenges are a fantastic, simple way to be part of a like-minded community and for staying accountable. There's Inktober with their official prompt list for a daily pen and ink challenge in the month of October. There's a broad selection of art challenges for every month, and all of them could be executed with pen and ink. You can check out my Pinterest board on art challenges for additional ideas. As well, linked below for you are the resources mentioned in this video. Those are the 10 tips that help accelerate my pen and ink drawing skills. In the next video, I'll talk more about how to customize a learning guide to achieve your art goals. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to read your comments on these 10 tips.